The dust had a way of clinging to everything out here, curling into the seams of boots and the folds of dresses, slipping beneath doors and settling in the corners of rooms no matter how many times you swept them clean. By late June the wind carried it in sheets across the open flats, fine as ground chalk. It was the kind of heat that stilled even the crickets, leaving only the rasp of the dry breeze against the dying cottonwoods to mark the passing of an afternoon. On such a day, Miriam Douglas stood on her porch with her apron bunched in one hand and the other shielding her eyes from the sun. The horizon shimmered in the distance, turning the plains into an ocean of wavering gold. She told herself she was only checking the condition of the well bucket or looking to see if the chickens had wandered too far from the coop, but the truth was she'd grown uneasy the past hour, the kind of uneasy that crawled up the spine and tapped once between the shoulder blades. There had been no visitors in weeks. No riders passing through. No supply wagons, no neighbors dropping by, no farmhands seeking short-term work. The ranches scattered across the northern ridge had felt emptier since her husband died in February, as though the land itself had taken a long breath inward and forgotten to let it out. Then she saw him. A solitary figure moved along the pale road, slow but steady, angled toward her property. At first he was no more than a blur of shadow and sun, shaped vaguely like a man on a tall horse. Then the wind drew a thin streak of dust in his wake, and the silhouette sharpened enough for her to see the wide brim of his hat and the sway of his long coat. Miriam's breath caught, not in fear but in something tightly knotted, anticipation maybe. Or dread. It wasn't unusual for travelers to appear, but she could tell by the man's posture that he wasn't seeking directions or water. He had the look of someone with a purpose, the way he sat the saddle like his spine was a straight line drawn from the road itself. She stepped back into the house, closing the screen door with care. Her heart thumped once, hard, before settling into a cautious rhythm. She was not defenseless. Her husband's rifle rested on the mantel, and she knew how to fire it well enough, but she didn't like the thought of using it on a stranger. Not unless she had to. When the creak of saddle leather and the steady clop of hooves reached the porch, she drew in a breath and stood behind the doorframe, fingers brushing the wood like it might steady her. "Afternoon, ma'am." The voice came low and even, carrying through the screen without strain. It wasn't demanding or loud, but there was a gravity to it that made her spine lift. Miriam stepped forward, pushing the screen door open just enough to see him clearly. He was older than she first expected, late 30s or maybe just brushing 40, with a sun-browned face half hidden beneath a shadowed hat brim. His coat was worn but clean, the color of dried mud, and his boots bore the marks of long distance. He wasn't dusty the way riders usually were. He carried himself with too much presence for that, too much deliberation. As though he dusted himself off before entering sight of a homestead. The stranger tipped his hat in greeting. His eyes were dark, steady, watchful in the way of men accustomed to danger. "Your well's the first one I've seen since leaving Copper Run," he said. "I was hoping to water my horse." Miriam hesitated. It was a simple request, harmless on the surface, but something in the man's bearing pressed a warning against her ribs. Still, she couldn't turn away a thirsty rider. Not out here. There were rules to the plains, unwritten but fixed as bedrock. "You can draw from the pump," she said, "but only up to what your horse needs. That's all I'm asking." He inclined his head, but made no move toward the well until she stepped fully onto the porch, signaling permission. Only then did he lead his horse toward the pump, the leather reins hanging loosely from his fingers. While he worked the handle and filled the trough, she stayed near the door, arms folded tightly. He didn't look her way as he tended the animal, but she sensed he was aware of her gaze all the same. "You live alone out here?" he asked without lifting his head. Miriam stiffened. "Why do you ask?" "Just conversation." The faintest hint of a smile touched his voice. "Most places between here and the Missouri have 2, maybe 3 hands working the land. I manage fine," she said, sharper than she intended. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment she felt pinned beneath the weight of that careful, unreadable gaze. He was the kind of man who scrutinized a person the way others studied a map, searching for borders, weaknesses, the quickest way through. But when he spoke again, his tone had softened. Didn't mean offense. She didn't reply. The horse finished drinking. The man placed a hand on its neck, brushing the coarse mane with a tenderness that surprised her. A man who handled a horse gently wasn't always gentle himself, but it said something. Enough, perhaps, for her to loosen the tight set of her shoulders. He stepped away from the trough and approached the porch slowly, stopping at the bottom step. He removed his hat fully this time, though the sun washed most of his expression in brightness. "Name's Colt Maddox," he said. "I'm not looking for trouble." "That's good," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her attempt at steadiness. "I've had enough trouble for a lifetime." Colt looked past her, toward the fields stretching behind the house. "This place yours?" "It was my husband's." He nodded once, quietly respectful. "I'm sorry." A long silence settled like dust between them. Miriam found herself clutching her apron again, fingers twisting the cloth until it wrinkled. She didn't want this man inside her home. She didn't want any man inside her home. But the plains had a way of forcing strangers together, and she could feel, in the gut-deep intuition that had guided her for years, that Colt Maddox hadn't come merely for well water. "What do you really want?" she asked, voice low. Colt's jaw tightened at that, but not in anger. More like reluctance. "A man passed through Copper Run 2 days ago. Rode a paint mare, carried a satchel he didn't want anyone asking about. Folks say he headed north." His gaze fixed on her porch, on the door behind her. "Tracks show he came this way." Miriam's throat went dry. She swallowed. "Plenty of riders come and go." "Not like him." Colt's voice dropped, a warning tangled in certainty. "He's running from something, and he's desperate. Desperate men do foolish things." She exhaled slowly. "What business do you have with him?" "Business I intend to finish." She didn't ask more. Something in the way he said it made her understand she didn't want the details. Colt rested a hand briefly on the rail of the porch, his fingers brushing the wood but not gripping it. He was close enough that she could see the frayed stitching on his coat sleeve and the faint white scar slashing across his knuckles. "I won't come inside unless I'm invited," he said quietly. "But I need to know if that rider stopped here." Miriam's heartbeat hammered in her chest, suddenly too loud. Her throat closed. Colt Maddox watched her reaction closely, too closely, and she fought the instinct to step back. She looked away. "I don't want you inside." "I know," he said just as softly. "But I need an answer all the same." Her stomach nodded. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Colt's voice gentled, surprising her. "I'm not here to hurt you, ma'am." But he still took a half step closer, his boots creaking faintly on the bottom stair. Miriam's breath snagged. She gripped the doorframe hard enough for her knuckles to blanch. "Please," she whispered before she could stop herself. "Don't come inside." Colt froze at the edge of the porch step, one boot on the lower rise, the other planted in the dust below. For a long breath he didn't move at all, as if her words had struck him harder than a rifle shot might have. His hat hung loosely from his fingers, his gaze fixed on her like he was reading the tremor in her posture, the alarm behind her eyes. "I'm not stepping over this threshold," he said at last, voice low, almost apologetic. "Not unless you tell me to. You have my word." Miriam didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it rushed out of her in a thin, shaky exhale. The muscles in her shoulders eased by a fraction, though she stayed pressed to the side of the doorway, her spine stiff and her hand clamped tight to the wood as though it anchored her to safety. Colt lifted his free hand slightly, palm outward in a gesture that meant no harm. "I'm not the man you think I am." Her voice barely carried. "I'm not thinking anything." "Ma'am," he began, but paused, as if reconsidering his words. "You flinched the moment I stepped closer. There's history in a reaction like that." "Bad history." Heat burned her cheeks, a hot mixture of shame and anger. "My past is none of your concern." "You're right," he said, quiet and steady. "But I figure it might be why you don't want me near your door." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words tangled uselessly. She didn't know this man. Didn't know what he'd seen or done. But somehow, infuriatingly, he'd looked right through the surface and found the bruise beneath it. Colt didn't push further. He stepped back from the stairs, giving her the distance she'd silently begged for. Only then did she feel her pulse begin to slow. A breeze rolled across the plains, stirring the hem of her dress. The late afternoon sun slanted through the cottonwoods, casting half her porch in shade, half in molten gold. Colt's face shifted between the two as he watched her, unreadable. "Did the rider stop here?" he asked again. No threat, no impatience. Just quiet insistence. Miriam steadied herself before answering, straightening her back. "He came by," she admitted. "2 nights ago." Colt's eyes sharpened, the faintest flicker of tension tightening his jaw. "He talked to you?" "Not much." She hesitated. "He asked for water." "Same as you." "But he didn't stay." She shook her head. "No." Colt studied her face for a long moment, weighing the truth in her expression. Something in her answer satisfied him, or at least didn't trigger suspicion, because he finally nodded, slow and thoughtful. "Did he seem hurt? Rushed? Frightened?" Miriam remembered the way the stranger had kept glancing over his shoulder, how his hands had trembled when he took the water bucket, how he'd flinched at the creak of her door hinges like the noise had been a warning shot. "Yes," she whispered. "All of that." Colt exhaled through his nose. Not relief, something darker. The kind of sound a man made when an expectation was confirmed. "And he didn't say where he was headed?" "No. He left before nightfall." Colt lifted his hat and settled it back on his head, shadowing his eyes once more. "Then I'm not far behind him." He stepped toward his horse, hand drifting to the reins, but he paused halfway, glancing back at her porch. "Thank you for answering. I know it wasn't easy." She swallowed. "What happens when you catch him?" "I bring him where he needs to go." "That isn't an answer." "It's the only one I can give you," he said, voice firm but not unkind. The silence stretched. Miriam gripped the edge of the screen door tighter. Colt looked at her again, not with suspicion this time, but with something like caution mixed with concern. "Is someone giving you trouble here, ma'am?" he asked. "Aside from that rider." Her breath hitched before she could stop it. Damn him. Damn the way he saw too much. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. His brow creased just slightly, the only sign he noticed a lie. But he didn't press. Instead, he nudged his horse to turn away from the porch. "I'll ride north, try to make distance before dusk. Tracks hold better before the wind picks up." He settled one foot in the stirrup. "But I want you to bolt your door tonight. Don't take chances." "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," he said, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. "But bolt it anyway." He tugged lightly on the reins and started down the dusty road. The horse moved in a steady rhythm, each hoofbeat fading into the quiet hum of the plains. Miriam watched him go, watched the outline of man and horse shrink against the burning horizon until they blurred into the rippling heat. Only then did she realize she was still clutching the doorframe with both hands. She forced her fingers to unclench, then stepped back inside the house, closing the screen with a soft thump. The room felt too still. Too empty. She drew the bolt across the door, not because Colt Maddox had told her to, she told herself that firmly, but because night would fall soon, and prudence had long become habit. Still, her mind stayed tangled around the encounter, replaying the cadence of his questions, the sharpness of his gaze, the unsettling gentleness in his tone. Miriam sank onto the chair beside the table, rubbing the tightness in her temples. "Not your concern," she muttered into the quiet. "Not any of it." But the words rang hollow. The sun dipped low as Colt rode north, painting the land in streaks of copper and blood orange. He didn't hurry. Haste made mistakes. But there was an urgency in the set of his shoulders, in the way he scanned the ground for impressions of hoofprints half buried beneath drifting dust. He found them just past the ridge, one horse, light in step, moving at a hasty pace. The rider had kept to the road for a time before veering sharply toward the low scrublands. Colt dismounted, crouching beside the tracks. The earth told him what he needed: weight uneven on the left stirrup, horse laboring under strain, rider shifting constantly. The man was either injured or panicked. Maybe both. Colt rose slowly, his gaze shifting south toward the distant speck of Miriam Douglas's homestead. He'd sensed fear in her, a fear that had nothing to do with him or the rider he hunted. He didn't know her story. Didn't need to. The plains were full of women carrying scars that didn't show on the skin. But something about her reaction, the way she'd whispered "don't come inside" as if the threshold were the only shield she had left, something about it sat wrong with him. Wrong enough that he stayed a few breaths longer than he should have before turning back to the trail. He swung onto his horse and guided it into the scrub. Miriam tossed sleepless beneath her thin quilt. The night air was hot, thick with the smell of dry grass and wood that needed chopping. Every creak of the house made her start. Every gust of wind rattling the shutters sounded like footsteps approaching the door. She hated this. Hated feeling watched even when she was alone. Hated how that stranger's visit, Colt's visit, had unsettled the fragile stillness she'd built around herself these past months. But most of all, she hated the dark memory clawing its way to the surface. The rider from 2 nights before. She had not told Colt everything. She hadn't told him the man had tried to push his way inside, that he'd grabbed the edge of her door when she tried to close it, that his breath had stunk of fear and whiskey as he demanded she let him rest a bit, just a few hours. She hadn't told Colt how her voice had broken as she threatened him with the rifle her husband left behind, how her hands had shaken so badly she feared she'd drop it instead of firing it. She hadn't told him she'd locked the door for nearly a full day afterward, too afraid to even open the shutters. Miriam pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to tame the memory back into silence. The house creaked again. The wind murmured against the roof. Her breath tightened. She sat up slowly, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Only the restless groan of the boards settling in the heat. She forced herself to lie back down. "Stop jumping at shadows," she whispered. But when she finally drifted into shallow sleep, it didn't last. Because sometime past midnight a sound cut through the house that wasn't wind, wasn't wood, wasn't settling quiet. A distant, muffled thud, somewhere outside. Her blood ran cold. She sat upright in the dark, heart pounding, breath trapped high in her chest. Another sound followed, softer, harder to place. Could have been an animal. Could have been nothing. Or it could have been a boot scuffing against dirt. Miriam slipped out of bed, feet silent on the floor, and crept toward the window. The moon hung low, a pale smear behind drifting clouds. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the yard clearly, but she could make out the shapes of the barn, the chicken coop, the wagon wheel leaning against the fence. All still. But her fear did not ease. She stood there several long minutes, watching the shadows breathe between the buildings. Waiting for movement. None came. Finally she backed away from the window, though the tightness in her gut didn't fade. She returned to bed but did not sleep. When dawn came, thin and gray before blooming into the harsh gold of another summer day, she rose with heavy eyes and a mind full of unfinished dread. She stepped onto the porch to check the animals. And stopped cold. There in the dust, at the bottom of the porch steps, was a single footprint. Fresh. Deep. Pressed hard enough to show the pattern of the sole. It had not been there the day before. Miriam covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Someone had been at her property in the night. Someone had stood just steps from her door. Someone had been at her property in the night. Someone had stood just steps from her door. Eva's eyes snapped open before the first hint of dawn had touched the horizon. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle she kept leaning against the wall beside her bed. Colt stirred beside her, eyes narrowing as he followed the tense line of her gaze. "Someone was outside," she whispered, her voice taut with barely contained fear. Colt sat up, careful not to wake Ruby, who was curled under the quilt, still in deep sleep. "Outside the cabin?" Eva nodded, gripping the rifle tightly. Someone's been here, watching. Last night. I didn't hear them leave, but I felt it. And this morning. Her gaze drifted toward the porch, where the snow bore a set of footprints that hadn't been there the day before. Small, careful, deliberate. Someone had approached and left without disturbing the child's play area. Colt rose, sliding on his boots silently. He checked the chamber of his revolver, then stepped to the window, scanning the tree-line. They didn't leave tracks going far, he muttered. Someone's been scouting the homestead. Could be Blackwood. Could be someone else. Eva's stomach nodded. Blackwood. The thought of him tracking them across miles of snow and ice was terrifying, but not impossible. Why now? She whispered. After everything, why here? Colt turned, his gray eyes hard. Because he doesn't give up. And maybe, he's not working alone. Eva swallowed hard. The possibility made her chest tighten. For weeks, they had enjoyed a fragile peace: the snow, the homestead, Ruby laughing, Colt repairing fences and chopping wood. But peace was a fragile thing. It didn't last on the frontier, not when power-hungry men like Blackwood still held grudges. We need to be ready, Colt said quietly, his voice carrying that calm authority Eva had come to trust. We don't know if it's just reconnaissance, or if they're planning to strike tonight. Eva nodded. Ruby, she needs to stay inside. Lock the doors. Windows. Every entrance. Colt knelt by the bed and brushed back Ruby's hair. Morning, little one, he said softly. Time to stay cozy. Mama and I have some grown-up work to do. Ruby blinked, still sleepy. Work? What work? Making sure no one bothers our home, Eva said firmly. You just stay inside and play, okay? Ruby nodded, trusting them completely. Colt and Eva moved quickly, barricading doors and windows, placing traps and alarms around the cabin's perimeter. Simple things, but enough to give them precious seconds if someone tried to approach unnoticed. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of wind outside, made Eva's pulse race. Hours passed with tension thick in the air. By mid-morning, the snow glinted ominously outside the cabin, the footprints from last night half covered but still visible. Colt crouched beside the marks, examining them carefully. Fresh snows since last night, he said. But the prints stopped just short of the cabin. Whoever was here, they're clever. They don't want to be seen. Yet. Eva's mind raced. Could Blackwood have sent someone else? A hired gun? Or worse, someone who knew Colt from before, who would recognize him even after the pardon? She turned to Colt, voice low. We can't leave. Not for a minute. Ruby can't know, she mustn't see us afraid. Colt nodded grimly. Agreed. But we need to draw them out, find out who's watching. Otherwise, we're blind. Eva's eyes narrowed. Then we wait, and we prepare. Whoever came here last night isn't just curious. They have a reason. And we're going to find out why. Outside, the wind carried a faint whisper, as if the mountains themselves were warning of the storm to come. And for the first time since the blizzard that had brought Colt into their lives, Eva felt the cold brush of fear that wasn't just for her, it was for Ruby. Some storms didn't announce themselves with thunder or snow. Some arrived in silence, with footsteps just beyond the door. And this one had already begun. Colt and Eva spent the morning fortifying the cabin, their movements quiet and precise. Every creak of timber, every crunch of snow underfoot was a reminder that someone had been close enough to reach the very threshold of their home. By mid-afternoon, Eva was standing at the window, staring into the distant tree-line. Snow shimmered in the sunlight, making it nearly impossible to see much beyond 100 feet, but she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. Colt approached, his voice low. Still there? Eva shook her head. I don't know. But they're close. Too close to ignore. Colt nodded. Then we'll lure them out. You ready for that? Eva didn't respond immediately. Her hands clenched on the windowsill. She had learned to trust Colt's instincts, even when they scared her. Finally she said, Yes. But we need a plan. Whoever it is, they're patient. Clever. Colt's eyes hardened. Then we match them. They think we're scared. They think we're vulnerable. But we're neither. By nightfall, the cabin was dark, save for the fire crackling in the hearth. Ruby had gone to bed, tucked in safely with the warmth of blankets surrounding her. Eva and Colt sat in silence, listening for anything unusual, the snap of a branch, the whisper of snow, the faintest rustle of movement outside. Hours passed. Then, just as midnight approached, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Colt's hand found the grip of his revolver without a sound. Eva froze, following his gaze. A figure stepped into the dim moonlight, cautious but deliberate. A man. Young, wiry, with the kind of alertness that marked a frontier scout or hired gun. He froze, seeing the cabin illuminated from within. Colt's voice was a low growl. Step closer. Or you leave. The figure hesitated, then raised his hands slowly. I'm not here to fight, he called. His voice carried across the snow. I come with a message. From Judge Blackwood. Eva's stomach dropped. Blackwood? She whispered. Colt's jaw tightened. Go on. He says you've crossed the line this time. That he intends to take Ruby by force if necessary. The man said. He sends me to warn you, or to negotiate. Eva's hands trembled. Negotiate? After everything? Colt's eyes narrowed. Then we let him come. We're not running. Not now. Not ever. The man nodded once, then melted back into the shadows, leaving a trail of footprints that led directly toward the tree-line. Colt examined them, his fingers brushing the fresh snow. They'll come again, he muttered. And next time, they won't warn us. Eva swallowed hard. Fear and determination wove together into a tight knot inside her. Then we fight, she said softly, almost to herself. No, Colt said firmly. We protect. We survive. And we make sure Ruby never knows the danger until she's ready. The next morning, Colt and Eva worked quickly. They set traps around the perimeter, created false trails in the snow, and moved quietly, always listening. For the first time since Blackwood had entered their lives, Eva realized that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy, cunning, and trust. Days passed. Each night brought new signs, footprints near the edge of the clearing, the faint glow of lanterns in the distance, whispers carried on the wind. Yet no one dared approach the cabin itself. Colt and Eva were ready. Then, one snowy evening, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. A group of men emerged from the tree-line, led by none other than Judge Blackwood himself. His face was a mask of fury and calculation. You thought you could defy me, he called across the clearing, voice ringing with authority. You've made a grave mistake, Blackthorn. Eva stepped forward, Colt at her side. This is our home, she shouted. You have no right. Blackwood laughed, bitter and cold. The law is on my side, woman. You know that. Colt's hand rested on his revolver. Not tonight. In a flurry of movement, the men advanced. Colt and Eva moved with the precision of a well-oiled team, covering each approach, keeping the attackers at bay without endangering Ruby, who watched safely from a window. Shots rang out, echoing across the snow-covered valley. Colt's aim was deadly accurate, each movement controlled and deliberate. Eva, for all her fear, fought beside him, using the traps they had prepared to slow and confuse Blackwood's men. The skirmish was brief but intense. When the smoke and chaos cleared, several of Blackwood's men lay incapacitated in the snow. Blackwood himself, breathing heavily, stood at the edge of the clearing, realizing the fight had turned against him. You'll pay for this, he spat. You think this is over? I'll return. Colt stepped forward, eyes steely. Try. But you'll find we're ready. And we protect what's ours. Blackwood glared, then finally mounted his horse, retreating into the night with a bitter, silent promise. Eva sank to her knees, exhausted but alive, her hands trembling. Colt knelt beside her, pulling her into a protective embrace. Ruby ran to them, wrapping her arms around both of their waists. You did it! she cried. Colt smiled, brushing the snow from her hair. We did it together. Eva looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and love. After storms, after trials, after threats and danger, they had survived. And for the first time, the homestead felt truly safe. As snow fell gently outside, blanketing the valley in silence, Eva realized something important. The frontier could throw anything at you: blizzards, bandits, corrupt judges. But with love, courage, and a little cunning, even the most impossible storms could be weathered. And the Raven, once feared across 3 territories, had found a home, not just with Eva and Ruby, but within the family he had chosen to protect. The night after Blackwood's retreat, Eva lay in bed, listening to the quiet crackle of the fire and the slow, steady breathing of Ruby beside her. Colt had gone outside to inspect the perimeter one more time before dawn. Despite the exhaustion, her mind refused to rest. Someone had been at her property in the night. Someone had stood just steps from her door. The thought looped endlessly in her mind. Blackwood might have left for now, but his influence lingered. His men would regroup. And then there was the worry that some other opportunist might try the same thing, knowing she was distracted, knowing she had a child and a wounded gunslinger on the property. Colt returned, moving quietly so as not to wake Ruby. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching Eva. Still awake? She nodded. I can't stop thinking about him. About what he might do next. About the people who might come after us. Colt stepped closer, his boots silent on the wooden floor. Then we make sure he doesn't succeed. We prepare. And we watch. Eva's heart clenched at the steady assurance in his voice. I don't want Ruby to ever see fear in my eyes. I can't let her grow up feeling the kind of danger I've felt these past months. You won't, Colt said softly, moving behind her to rest a protective hand on her shoulder. We'll make sure of that. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Eva and Colt immediately set to work. There was the barn to reinforce, the woodshed to inspect, and the fences to mend. Every task was done with the knowledge that they were fortifying more than property. They were fortifying their lives, their family, against a world that could turn cruel and violent in an instant. Ruby watched them work with wide-eyed admiration, occasionally trying to help with small tasks, her tiny hands clumsy but determined. Colt knelt beside her, showing her how to hammer gently without risking injury. That's it, Miss Ruby. Steady. Every nail counts. Eva smiled at the scene. I never thought I'd see the day when the Raven became a teacher, she said lightly. Colt's gray eyes met hers, a wry smirk tugging at his lips. Some lessons are worth teaching. By late afternoon, they were interrupted by the sound of a distant hoofbeat. Eva froze, her instincts screaming that this was no casual traveler. Colt was already moving, reaching for his revolver. The snow glimmered in the fading sun as a figure emerged from the trees, a messenger riding hard, breath steaming in the cold air. He skidded to a stop near the cabin, throwing himself from the saddle. Marshal Warren! He called. Urgent news! Colt exchanged a look with Eva. Go on, he said. The messenger drew a rolled document from his coat and handed it to Colt. Warren's seal marked the paper official. Colt unfurled it carefully. A bounty, he murmured. Eva leaned closer. What? Not on me, Colt said. On Blackwood. Federal authorities have gathered enough evidence to investigate his mining operations, his land grabs, and his intimidation tactics. If he moves against us again, he'll be the one under scrutiny. Eva let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. So we're safe? Colt's expression was serious. Not entirely. But we're not the ones walking into legal danger this time. And that changes everything. That evening, after the messenger had left and the cabin settled into quiet once more, Eva found herself beside Colt on the porch. The sky was a deep indigo, stars scattered like diamonds across the cold horizon. Ruby had gone to bed hours ago, and the house was filled with the comforting hum of the fire. Colt's voice broke the silence. You've been holding a lot inside, Eva. About Ruby, about me, about everything that's happened. You don't have to carry it alone. I want to be strong for her, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But some nights, I'm not sure I can. Not after all we've been through. Colt's hand found hers, warm and firm against her cold fingers. Then let me carry it with you. Let me be the one who stands between danger and your family. That's what I'm here for. Eva met his eyes, feeling a fierce mixture of love and gratitude. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope, not just survive, but hope for something more, a life filled with safety, laughter, and the steady heartbeat of family. The next days passed in a fragile rhythm of work and preparation. Colt helped Ruby with lessons, Eva tended to the homestead, and together they patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no one could approach unnoticed. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing the frozen ground beneath and the promise of spring. One morning, Eva spotted movement near the tree line, 3 figures, clearly observing, hiding in the shadows. Colt saw them too, silently signaling Eva to remain calm. They're testing us, Colt said quietly. Trying to see what defenses we've set. But we're ready this time. That night, as the cabin lay quiet and the fire burned low, they reviewed their plan. Colt drew a crude map in the ash on the hearth, marking weak points, lines of sight, and escape routes. Eva contributed her knowledge of the land, the hidden gullies, the rock outcroppings, the safest paths for Ruby in case of an emergency. By dawn, the 3 hidden figures were gone, and the threat had vanished as quietly as it had appeared. But Eva knew better than to relax completely. Blackwood's reach was long, and while federal authorities had put him under scrutiny, he was nothing if not patient. As weeks turned into months, life on the homestead settled into a new normal. Colt became not only protector but teacher and partner. Ruby flourished under his guidance, her laughter ringing across the valley each morning. Eva found herself allowing small joys, a warm cup of coffee on the porch, quiet conversations with Colt, the satisfaction of seeing the homestead prosper. Yet, despite the peace, there was always the memory of the storm, the knowledge that danger could return at any moment. And when it did, Eva and Colt knew they would face it together, not as a widow and a notorious gunslinger, but as a family, united and unbroken. Spring had finally begun to thaw the snow-covered valley, and with it came a renewed energy to the Ravencrest homestead. Eva stood at the edge of the orchard, surveying the budding apple trees that promised fruit for the coming fall. Colt was nearby, examining the repaired fence along the northern pasture, Ruby bounding ahead of him, her laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Life seemed almost impossibly serene. Almost. Eva's peace, however, was fragile. Blackwood had not disappeared entirely. His influence lingered like a shadow over the territory. Rumors reached Crimson Falls, miners threatened, neighbors coerced, whispers of litigation and intimidation. While federal scrutiny had slowed him, it hadn't eliminated his desire for vengeance. And Eva knew that one day, he would try again. Colt approached her, dusting his hands on his worn coat. "You're worried," he said, reading her expression with practiced ease. "I can't stop thinking about Blackwood," she admitted. "He's patient. He waits. And when he sees an opportunity, he won't hesitate." Colt placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance. We protect the homestead, Ruby, and each other. That's all that matters." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Colt took Ruby to train on horseback while Eva checked the orchard for winter damage. The young girl rode with a confidence that surprised even Colt, her small frame steady as she guided her horse through the newly cleared paddock. Colt's pride was evident in the proud tilt of his head and the quiet, pleased grin he allowed himself. Eva watched from the porch, her heart warming at the sight of her daughter laughing without fear, free in the vast expanse of their property. As they returned, a distant cloud of dust caught Eva's eye. She squinted toward the horizon and saw a small wagon approaching, its driver moving with urgent haste. Colt noticed too, his hand instinctively resting near his revolver. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Eva. Ruby, sensing the tension, slowed her trot and fell behind her mother. The wagon stopped at the edge of the property, and a figure leapt down, a young man, no older than 17, his face pale with urgency. "Mrs. Ravencrest?" he called, voice shaking. "You have to help us." Eva hurried forward, Colt close behind. "Who are you? What's wrong?" "It's my sister, she's sick," the boy said, breathless. "We tried the town doctor, but he refused. He says she needs someone who can really help. He said you saved someone before, and maybe you could help her too." Colt's eyes narrowed. "Where is she?" "Just a few miles east. We don't have much time. Please, Mrs. Ravencrest. Please help her." Eva exchanged a glance with Colt. The fear in the boy's eyes mirrored the desperation she had felt so many times herself. She nodded. "All right. We'll help. Colt, get the medical kit ready." The journey eastward was swift, with Colt leading the way, Ruby riding beside him, eager to help in any way she could. Eva sat with the boy, asking questions, reassuring him, learning what little she could about the girl's condition. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the modest cabin where the girl lay. Inside, the girl, no more than 10 years old, was pale, fevered, and clearly in pain. Eva knelt beside her, examining her carefully. "High fever," she murmured, checking her pulse and listening to her breathing. Colt stood nearby, surveying the room for any threats, his ever-watchful eyes taking in the surroundings. "This is serious," Eva said quietly. "We need to act fast." Hours passed as she worked tirelessly, treating the girl with every measure she had at her disposal. Colt stayed close, offering reassurance, fetching supplies, and occasionally holding Ruby back when the child's curiosity threatened to disrupt Eva's work. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the girl's fever had broken, her breathing steadied, and color returned to her cheeks. Relief flooded Eva as she finally allowed herself to sit back, exhaustion overtaking her. "You did it," Colt said quietly, eyes full of admiration. "Just like you always do." Eva smiled weakly. "It's not me alone. I couldn't do this without you. Without all of us working together." The girl's family, exhausted but grateful, knelt to thank Eva and Colt. "How can we ever repay you?" the mother asked, tears streaming down her face. Eva shook her head. "Take care of each other. That's enough." As they returned home, the sun climbed higher, illuminating the homestead with warm light. Ruby, exhausted but exhilarated, clung to Colt's hand, chattering excitedly about the adventure. Eva followed behind, her mind spinning with thoughts. This, helping those who couldn't help themselves, was the life she had always wanted, the life she had fought so hard to protect. Yet even in the bright morning, a shadow lingered in the back of her mind. Blackwood had not given up. His schemes, subtle and insidious, would continue. But for now, surrounded by her daughter, her husband, and the safety of the homestead, Eva allowed herself a moment of peace. And somewhere deep in the forests bordering their land, eyes watched, waiting. Blackwood's retreat had been tactical, not final. The real storm was still coming, and Eva, Colt, and Ruby would have to stand together when it arrived. Even as the morning light stretched across the valley, a sense of unease clung to the homestead. Eva couldn't shake it. Something had shifted. Blackwood was patient, and patience was his deadliest weapon. Colt noticed her distracted gaze and stepped close, resting a firm hand on her shoulder. "What is it?" "I don't know," Eva admitted, scanning the tree line. "I feel like we're being watched." Colt's eyes narrowed. "You're not imagining it." He moved to the edge of the orchard, peering into the dense stand of evergreens. A glint of movement, a shadow slipping between the trees, confirmed what he already suspected. Blackwood hadn't given up. Eva clenched her fists. "He's waiting. For what, I don't know. But it's only a matter of time before he strikes again." "Then we make sure we're ready," Colt said. His voice carried the calm authority that had once made men tremble at his name. "We protect this land, this family, and anyone who comes seeking help. No exceptions." Ruby, oblivious to the tension, bounced up to them, her cheeks flushed from the cold and exertion. "Mama! Papa!" Look what I found! She held up a scrap of parchment tied with faded ribbon. It was a small, hastily folded note, the ink smudged from snow and moisture. Eva carefully opened it and read aloud. Mrs. Ravencrest, please help. My son is in danger. He doesn't know who to trust. I can't go to the law. They'll turn him over to men who want to hurt him. Please, you must help him. Sarah Mitchell. Colt's jaw tightened. Kansas. His voice was low, dangerous. She's the one who came to us weeks ago. She must have reached someone else first and been ignored. That's why she's risking this again. Eva folded the note carefully. We can't ignore it. We have to go. Colt nodded. We leave at first light. Ruby stays with me. She won't know we're gone, and she'll be safe here until we return. That night, Eva lay awake in the small guest room, listening to the wind sigh through the trees. Colt slept beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers. She traced the faint scar along his knuckles, remnants of a past life that had once been violent and solitary, and marveled at how much he had changed in the weeks since they had married. Still, there was a hardness beneath his calm exterior, a readiness to defend, to strike, to protect. And Eva knew it was that very hardness that would be needed in the days ahead. By first light, Colt and Eva were mounted and heading east, Ruby waving from the porch, a small bundle of wildflowers clutched tightly in her hands. The journey was grueling. The snow had mostly melted, leaving roads muddy and treacherous. As they rode, Eva could feel the tension in Colt's posture, the constant vigilance he maintained, as though every shadow in the forest hid danger. Hours later, they arrived at the Mitchell homestead, a small cluster of cabins surrounded by an unkempt orchard. The gates were unlatched, the front door ajar. Colt drew his revolver with a quiet, fluid motion, his eyes sweeping the perimeter. Eva moved behind him, carrying her medical kit. Inside, the scene was worse than she had imagined. The cabin's single room was in disarray. Furniture overturned, dishes shattered, and a small boy of 5 huddled in the corner, his eyes wide with terror. Sarah Mitchell knelt beside him, tears streaking her cheeks, and rose when she saw Eva and Colt. Thank God you're here, she whispered. They came last night. Men from the town, they said I owed them for my husband's debts. They threatened my son. I had nowhere else to turn. Eva knelt before the boy, her voice soft, calm. It's all right, little one. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. She examined him quickly. He was unharmed physically, but the terror in his eyes was profound. Colt placed a steadying hand on her back, scanning the room, noting exits and potential threats. We don't have time to wait, he said. We're taking you both back to Crimson Falls. They won't follow if we move quickly and quietly. The journey home was tense, Colt leading the way with Eva and the boy behind him. Sarah rode in the wagon, keeping the frightened child close. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, and Eva felt a gnawing anxiety she couldn't shake. Somewhere in the trees, Blackwood's influence still lingered, men loyal to him, quietly observing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Night fell, and with it came snow, soft and muffling, covering tracks and giving them some measure of concealment. Colt guided them through hidden paths only he knew, taking care to avoid main roads. The boy finally relaxed in Eva's arms, lulled by her gentle voice and the warmth of the blanket she had wrapped around him. Sarah's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, trembling slightly as she finally allowed herself to breathe. By dawn, the Ravencrest homestead emerged through the mist, a welcoming sight. Ruby had built a small snow fort near the barn, proudly defending her territory with a stick in each hand. She squealed with delight when she saw them return safely. Inside, Eva set about preparing a warm breakfast, while Colt checked the perimeter, ensuring no one had followed them. Sarah and her son sat quietly, cautiously accepting the comfort and safety of the homestead. You'll be safe here, Eva assured them. We have people who care, who will protect you. You're part of our family now, even if only for a while. Over the following weeks, Sarah's son, named Henry, began to relax, learning to trust again, laughing with Ruby and following Eva's gentle guidance. Colt trained him in the basics of riding and self-defense, his lessons delivered with patience and care. Slowly, the boy began to thrive, the shadow of terror from his past retreating under the warmth of family and safety. Meanwhile, Blackwood's machinations continued, though he had yet to act openly. Rumors filtered back from Crimson Falls. He was attempting to rally the remaining miners, sowing discontent, and investigating ways to undermine the Ravencrest's reputation. Every day, Colt and Eva prepared, reinforcing fences, keeping the children close, and remaining vigilant. One night, as Eva finished her rounds checking the animals, Colt approached from the barn, his coat dusted with snow. "I think it's time we taught Blackwood a lesson he won't forget," he said quietly. "He's patient, yes. But so are we. And when he makes his move, he won't know what hit him." Eva looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Are you sure? If we confront him, it could get dangerous." "I've never been more sure of anything," Colt replied. "We protect our family, or we lose everything." Eva nodded, a fierce determination settling in her chest. The homestead was more than land or shelter, it was a symbol of survival, courage, and love. Blackwood would find that out soon enough. The next morning, they spotted him, a small band of men, loyal to Blackwood, attempting to trespass on the Ravencrest's land. Colt and Eva prepared carefully, planning to confront them directly but strategically. Ruby and Henry were safely inside, kept occupied with chores and lessons. When the men approached, Colt stepped forward, revolver in hand. "Turn around. You're not welcome here." The leader, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, sneered. "We're here on Judge Blackwood's orders. Hand over the widow and the gunslinger, or you'll regret it." Colt's voice was cold, unwavering. "You'll regret trying." Eva stepped beside him, her own resolve steeling her nerves. This was their home, their family, their life. They would fight if they had to. A tense standoff ensued, Colt and Eva's combined presence enough to unsettle the intruders. With calm, precise action, Colt disarmed the first man, Eva incapacitated another with a cleverly aimed throw of a small but heavy tool. Within minutes, the remaining intruders, realizing they were outmatched, retreated into the forest, leaving a trail of footprints in the snow that Colt would track if needed. As they returned to the cabin, heart still racing, Eva allowed herself to breathe deeply. "We did it," she whispered. Colt pulled her close. "Yes. Together. Nothing will break us. Not him, not anyone." Eva looked around at the homestead, the children, the animals, the fences and fields, and felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was more than survival now. It was justice, protection, and the building of a new legacy. Blackwood would come again, she knew, but the Ravencrests were ready. And this time, they would not merely survive, they would triumph. Days passed in tense vigilance. Snow had mostly melted, leaving muddy trails and streams that ran fast from the mountains. Colt spent hours patrolling the perimeter, while Eva trained Henry in basic survival skills and continued to teach Ruby about the homestead. They worked seamlessly, a rhythm born of trust, necessity, and love. But the calm was fragile. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of fire and blood, a rider appeared on the distant ridge, moving fast and purposefully. Colt spotted him first, squinting against the fading light. His expression tightened. "Blackwood's doing," he muttered. "He's testing the waters." Eva's stomach clenched. "Are you sure it's him?" Colt nodded. "He sends messages now, before he acts. This rider is the message. We'll deal with the act when it comes." By nightfall, the rider reached the edge of the homestead and stopped, dropping a folded parchment at the gate. No words, no threats, just a paper weighted with a small stone. Colt retrieved it carefully. Eva watched over his shoulder as he unfolded it. The message was simple, but the threat behind it was unmistakable. "Ravencrest, your defiance has consequences. Leave the land or suffer the results." Blackwood. Colt's jaw clenched. "He's getting bold. Wants us to panic, to make mistakes." Eva's hands trembled slightly, though she kept her voice steady. "Then we don't. We show him that this home isn't easy to take. Colt nodded. Exactly. We prepare, and if he comes himself, he'll find a family ready to fight. Over the following days, the homestead transformed. Fences were reinforced, traps laid for intruders, and signals established to alert them of anyone approaching. Colt trained Henry in stealth and observation, while Ruby learned the routes and hideouts around the property. Eva focused on emergency preparedness, stockpiling provisions, and fortifying their small cabin. One crisp morning, Eva noticed tracks leading toward the barn, too large to be Ruby or Henry's. Colt examined them carefully. Blackwood's men, he said grimly. They're scouting again. Eva felt the familiar surge of fear and anger. We can't wait for him to act. We have to take the initiative, but carefully. We need to show him that Crimson Falls and this homestead aren't easy prey. Colt studied her. Are you ready for what that might mean? Eva met his gaze, determination in her eyes. I've never been more ready. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Colt and Eva set out on horseback, taking a circuit through the outer woods to see how many men were scouting, how they were moving, and where they might strike. The air was tense, every crack of a branch and whisper of wind setting nerves on edge. They found 3 men crouched near the tree-line, clearly unprepared for a confrontation with Colt and Eva. Colt signaled, and they approached quietly. Within moments, the intruders were captured, bound, and placed in a small clearing where they could be questioned. Eva's voice was firm but calm. Who sent you? The men exchanged nervous glances. Blackwood, he said. He'd handle the Ravencrests himself if we failed. Colt's gray eyes narrowed. Alone? He's coming alone? That's bold. He turned to Eva. He's confident, too confident. We need to be ready for anything. The next week passed in uneasy anticipation. Colt and Eva reinforced defenses and trained the children discreetly, teaching them lessons of vigilance, courage, and survival. Ruby showed remarkable resilience, her childish fear replaced by the fierce confidence of a child who knew her family could protect her. Henry followed cautiously, learning the ropes and slowly finding the sense of safety he had lost in Kansas. Then, one stormy afternoon, Blackwood arrived in person. He came mounted on a black horse, flanked by no one. The storm seemed to suit him, a dramatic entrance befitting his overinflated sense of self. Colt and Eva met him on the front steps, Ruby peeking from behind Eva's skirts. Blackwood, Colt greeted, voice calm, but steel underlined every word. What a surprise! Blackwood's expression was venomous. Ravencrests. I warned you. And yet here you are, Eva said, stepping forward. Her hand brushed Colt's lightly, a silent show of unity. What do you want? Blackwood smirked. I came to remind you that defiance has consequences. The land, the child, both belong to the proper order of things. You cannot hold them without repercussions. Eva's jaw tightened. The proper order of things doesn't belong to men like you. Colt's hand rested casually near his revolver. We're not afraid of you, Blackwood. Not anymore. The judge's expression twisted in fury. You dare defy me? Eva took a step closer. We dare because we have to. This is our home. Our family. And you will not take that from us. Blackwood sneered, his eyes narrowing as he sized them up. I suppose a gunslinger and a widow think they can defy a territorial judge? Colt smiled, cold and dangerous. Try me. The tension in the air was electric, a storm ready to break. But before Blackwood could make a move, a series of rifle shots rang out from the tree-line. Blackwood's men, scouts he had left hidden, were suddenly incapacitated by precise, calculated fire. Colt's eyes glimmered with satisfaction as he recognized the pattern. He had anticipated this, set traps for the intruders. Eva's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Leave now, Blackwood. Return to Denver and tell your law that the Ravencrests don't bow to bullies. We will defend what's ours. For a tense moment, Blackwood's fury battled with reason. Then, with a snarl, he turned his horse, spurring it back toward the tree-line. Colt and Eva watched until he disappeared into the storm, knowing he would return, but also knowing they had won a vital psychological victory. Over the following weeks, word of the Ravencrest's defiance spread throughout Crimson Falls and surrounding territories. People began seeking refuge at the homestead, widows escaping abusive husbands, children fleeing danger, families in need of protection. Colt and Eva's home had become a sanctuary, a place where fear could be met with courage, and despair with hope. One evening, as snow began to fall gently, Eva stood at the edge of the orchard with Ruby and Henry, watching Colt return from his rounds. The wind carried the scent of pine and firewood, a faint warmth in the cold night. Ruby ran to meet her father, laughter ringing through the clearing. Henry followed, hesitant but smiling. Eva felt a hand slip into hers. Colt's eyes, still shadowed with past darkness, held hers with something steady and unyielding. "They're safe," he said quietly. Eva smiled. "For now." Colt nodded, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "But the frontier never rests. And neither do those who seek to harm others. We'll be ready." Together, they returned to the cabin, the children following closely, and Eva felt a deep, grounding sense of purpose. Their life was complicated, dangerous, and unpredictable, but it was theirs. Every challenge, every threat, every storm only strengthened their resolve. They were no longer just survivors. They were protectors, guardians of a legacy of courage, hope, and family. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the promise of more trials. But inside, the Ravencrests were united. Colt's hand found hers, Ruby nestled between them, Henry holding Eva's other hand, and for a moment, the future, however uncertain, felt full of possibility. Because some storms could break you, and some storms could forge you. And Eva knew, without a doubt, that the Ravencrests would face them all, together. Winter had returned with a vengeance. Snow fell thick and relentless, blanketing the homestead in pristine white. Inside, the Ravencrests moved like a well-oiled machine, Colt patrolling, Eva organizing supplies and checking on Sarah and her young son, and Ruby and Henry laughing in the warmth of the cabin, oblivious to the tension outside. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm coming for them. A distant hoofbeat echoed through the night. Colt's head snapped toward the sound, muscles tensing. He'd been expecting Blackwood to return, he'd anticipated it, but even the best foresight couldn't quell the unease that knotted in his chest. "Eva," he said softly, not wanting to alarm the children. "Get Ruby and Henry ready. We might have company sooner than we thought." Eva's face was calm, but her heart hammered. "We've prepared for this, Colt. Whatever he brings, we face it together." Outside, through the swirling snow, the silhouette of a rider appeared, tall, rigid, unmistakable. Judge Blackwood. Alone, but more dangerous for it. He carried with him the air of entitlement, of a man used to having his way. Colt's hand rested on his revolver. Eva stayed close to him, ready to act, ready to protect her family. Blackwood dismounted near the edge of the yard, boots crunching in the snow. "Ravencrest," he called, voice icy and sharp. "I will not be humiliated. That land, that child, belongs under my authority." Colt stepped forward. "You've been warned, Blackwood. Leave now, or this ends tonight, your choice." The judge laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You presume to threaten me, a judge of the territory? Do you think a gunslinger's pardon can shield you from justice?" "I don't presume. I know," Colt said, voice low and lethal. "You'll find we defend our home better than anyone you've faced." Blackwood's hand twitched toward his coat, but Colt was faster. In a blur, Colt drew, placing the muzzle of his revolver just inches from Blackwood's chest. "One more move, and you'll find out just how fast we are." Eva's hand found Colt's, grounding him, and grounding herself. She spoke with unwavering authority. "Judge, I will not let you harm anyone here. Turn back, or leave, or face the consequences. This is our home, and these are our lives. You've had your chance to leave. Now choose." For a long moment, Blackwood glared at them, fury and disbelief battling with the reality before him. Finally, he spat into the snow. "This isn't over," he hissed, mounting his horse. Colt's aim never wavered. "Make sure you mean it." Colt said. Blackwood's horse bolted, and the judge disappeared into the storm. For the first time in months, the homestead was silent, save for the wind and the crunch of snow under Colt's boots as he returned inside. Inside, Eva exhaled, letting the tension drain from her body. Ruby ran into her arms, and Henry followed, cheeks flushed from the cold. Colt watched them, a quiet pride in his eyes. "We did it," Eva whispered. "We survived him." Colt shook his head, still scanning the horizon. "For now. But this is our life. And if anyone wants to test us again, they'll find we're ready." Over the following months, the Ravencrest's reputation grew. Families seeking refuge found safe harbor on the homestead. Colt trained those who could defend themselves, Eva organized supplies and care, and Sarah and her son flourished under their protection. Ruby and Henry became inseparable, the laughter and light of the children bringing warmth to even the coldest winter nights. And Colt and Eva? Their bond only strengthened, forged through danger, trust, and shared responsibility. One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson, Eva stood on the porch, Colt at her side. Ruby and Henry played nearby, their laughter carrying across the snow-covered fields. Colt's arms slipped around Eva's shoulders. "Do you ever think about what our life might have been if things had gone differently?" Eva smiled, leaning into him. "I do. But I don't regret a thing. Every danger, every storm, it brought us here. To this." He kissed her temple, eyes soft. "To this." Ruby ran up, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama! Papa! Come see! I built a snow fort." Eva and Colt laughed, following her to the edge of the orchard, where she proudly pointed to a small fortress of snow, complete with walls and a lookout post. "This is our world," Eva said quietly, watching Colt interact with their children. "Safe, strong, and full of love. And we'll protect it, no matter what comes." Colt's eyes met hers, full of promise. "Always." That night, the cabin glowed warmly, a beacon in the snow. Families slept in peace, children dreamt without fear, and two people who had survived storms of every kind finally allowed themselves to rest. Because in the Wild West, courage wasn't measured by how many guns you carried or how fast you drew. It was measured by the strength of your heart, the bonds of your family, and the will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in the Ravencrest's homestead, those bonds were unbreakable. Outside, the wind howled, carrying snow across the fields, but inside, laughter, warmth, and love prevailed. The frontier was unpredictable, and danger would come again, but the Ravencrests were ready. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were home. And for Eva, Colt, Ruby, Henry, and all those who would come seeking refuge, that was enough. The storm could rage. The world could test them. But they had each other, and sometimes, that was all that mattered.